Beginning publicly in 1961, Lyndon LaRouche forecast that after the middle of the 1960s, the first of a series of major monetary disturbances would result in the collapse of the existing Bretton Woods agreements. This collapse would cause increased looting of the developing sector nations and the imposition of austerity measures model upon those of fascist regimes in international economic relations and in the U.S. domestic economy. Teaching a course on economics at a number of universities, LaRouche recruited the original members of his youth movement, who were otherwise being trained to usher in the fascist economic policies of his intellectual rivals, who he called quackademics. The quackademics insisted that LaRouche's forecast was wrong, and that Bretton Woods could never collapse because of built-in stabilizers. But by August 15, 1971, it was obvious that LaRouche had been right, and every economist who refused to accept his assessment was a
Well, he was laughed at for that particular prediction. That's why it was such a vindication of him when it happened. And we had a massive wave of recruitment. Because I think one thing people knew about him more than anything else, among those who were interested at all, was that this guy's a nut because he thinks the Bretton Woods system will collapse. Whereas it's impossible because we have built-in stabilizers. That was the big thing then. In fact, when I took college economics, the whole point was the built-in stabilizers. There can never be another depression collapse because now we have the built-in stabilizers.
But how was it that LaRouche had been correct and all the others incompetent? LaRouche understood, as the putative authorities did not, that economics is existential. For each technological mode of economic activity, there is a corresponding finite resource base. In order to avoid the collapse of society that would surely follow the exhaustion of any one resource base, new technologies must be introduced. Hence, society must foster activity that will generate the scientific discoveries upon which the possibility of new, higher technologies and their associated resource bases depend. However, the putative authorities not only rejected this notion of economics, but created elaborate financial fantasies where monetary processes, like the increase in money supply, was supposedly a key indicator of economic prosperity. What those standard monetarist theories fail to take into account is the incommensurability of physical and monetary processes. With that crucial misunderstanding, disaster becomes simultaneously invisible to those within the system and inevitable for the system itself. Such was the case when LaRouche put out the challenge for any economist to debate him. 4 months after Nixon ended the Bretton Woods system, the quackademics offered up Abba Lerner, the establishment's leading Keynesian economist.
There was the famous incident in December of 1971 where Lyndon LaRouche debated Professor Abba Lerner at Queens College and shamed Lerner into admitting that he was a Schachtian. And at one point, Lerner defended himself by saying if they had listened to Schacht, Hitler would not have been necessary. And there was just a complete stunned silence in the room. I mean, this was tantamount to one of the great so-called liberal economists in New York City admitting that he was a Nazi. At that point, LaRouche was directly warned by none other than Sidney Hook, who had been the head of the Congress for Cultural Freedom. And Hook told LaRouche right after that Abba Lerner debate, we have now categorized you as a potential threat. And if you ever reach the point that you begin to develop real political clout, we will destroy you.
What was this faction that was intent on bringing back the economic policies of Nazi finance minister Hjalmar Schacht only 20 years after the United States had defeated fascism?
soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force. You are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world.
On June 6, 1944, the Allied forces made their long-awaited breakthrough at Normandy. At the moment the U.S. troops landed on mainland Europe, it was known that the war would soon be won. The right-wing faction in the United States, which had originally helped to create the fascist governments of Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler, saw the assured victory of the Allies as their moment to move back in. Due to direct British intervention, Franklin Roosevelt's loyal partner, Henry Wallace, was denied the vice presidency, and Harry S. Truman was brought in as a running mate who would be more tolerable to the right wing. The world had been set on the track to growth and reconstruction by the 1944 Bretton Woods agreements, where it was determined that as long as the United States dollar was widely issued and widely used as credit for industrial, agricultural, and related productive purposes, it was as good as gold. Under those circumstances of vast credit expansion, the world was on the track to reconstruction in a post-war, post-colonial period. But it was no sooner than Roosevelt had died that the Bretton Woods system came under attack. His intention for productive credit generation was not realized, and the dollar was overstretched to supplement a growing services economy, producing a burgeoning consumer debt bubble in the United States. Under these conditions, the developing sector was not industrialized. Instead of gaining economic and political independence, they were recolonized under the leadership of Harry Truman. The most severe attack against the Bretton Woods system took place following the 1964 election of the Harold Wilson government. The British pound sterling, the currency of colonial trade, had been made the second international reserve currency, in spite of the fact that it was always considered to be the sick man of the fixed exchange rate system. In 1967, when the pound was in a free fall, Wilson appealed to the managing director of the IMF, who desperately wanted to end Roosevelt's Bretton Woods system, and he requested $3 billion to ostensibly save the British pound. When the IMF director refused the loan, Britain forced a 14% devaluation of their pound and triggered an international liquidation of dollar holdings for gold. This set off a chain reaction of monetary crises throughout the late 1960s, culminating in the 1968 Monetary Conference, where a fight erupted between the British, who argued that the crises were caused by the Bretton Woods system, and the faction typified by France's Charles de Gaulle, who blamed these crises on speculation and currency devaluation.